You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's episode, featuring a former Green Beret, one who now holds a very important title, curating one of the most important foundations that is going on in America. We'll get to that coming up in just a moment. Our normal announcements, as always, please continue to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Starting to get a little more momentum there. Appreciate you guys doing so. As well, I want to remind you guys to use our Amazon promotion on our website. Go to hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage. It'll redirect you to Amazon. You do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend. I'll donate a percentage of that back to some of the charities and organizations featured here on the show, like the one you'll hear today, which I think is an incredibly worthy cause to donate to. As well, please continue to leave us Apple reviews. If you guys can go to Apple and leave a review for the podcast, it'll help grow the show, put it in front of more people. We'll continue to get these stories heard all over the place, wherever you get your podcast. Continue to leave us a review, 5 stars. Tell us why you love the show. Finally, we have some stickers again. I got stickers in, and I will send them out to you guys. So if you guys just hit me up and you're on social media and you're following us on social media on all 3 sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'll be sure to send you a Hazard Ground sticker, a little swag on the way coming for you guys. So we certainly appreciate all the love and support. This week's guest is, if anything, I am persistent with this week's guest. I've sought him out for a while and found out what he was doing, and then read about his background. It certainly is somebody that I think you guys are going to enjoy hearing from. Retired Green Beret, retired Army Master Sergeant, and he spent over 20 years in the military, had over 10 deployments to the Balkans and Iraq. He's got a Bronze Star with Valor device, and he currently is the Chief of Operations for the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation. And he is Darrell Utt, joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Darrell, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's great to be on Hazard Ground, man. You got a great podcast, and I'm honored and privileged to be here with you guys.
Thank you. I kind of left some things out of your bio as well. You were actually nominated, or you won the award, the Major General Robert T. Frederick Top Operator Award in 2006. That's for a Green Beret 18 Series Special Forces non-commissioned officer whose duty had a significant impact on the Special Forces community in the last year. The Larry Thorne Award in 2006. And so, you have had a long, distinguished career inside the Green Berets. You also worked at the Special Warfare Center and School in North Carolina, training other Green Berets. I mean, just an incredibly lengthy career, and now doing something fantastic with the National Medal of Honor Museum. So it's great to finally catch up with you. I know we've tried this many times, but persistency is key here. Let's get started, because it's funny. I was going through your background. We were talking before we started recording. I have so much to get to you about. We literally crossed paths in Iraq. We had to have. And it's this happens every now and then when I run across people within the Green Beret, community, within the special ops community, because I was fortunate enough to be attached to those guys in 05 to 06. And you guys rotate in, rotate out much quicker than the regular Army does. Well, I was sitting there picking my ass for over a year. You guys were moving and back and forth and back and forth. So we absolutely cross paths at some point. We'll see if we can hash it out as we get going with the show. But your career started way before 9/11. So tell us why you decided to sign up for the military in a very relative peacetime world.
Yeah, so I graduated high school all the way back in 1990. So if that gives you a little indication of my age, just hit 51. So going strong, though, going strong.
Seasoned.
Graduated all the way back in 1990 from Huntington, West Virginia. And I definitely want to give my folks back in Huntington, West Virginia a shout out. Had a great upbringing, and man, all of that stuff just kind of combined together to really give me a solid base before I really even knew what was going on. But really, Mark, I didn't have a lot of opportunity. I came from a poor family, humble beginnings, I guess is the better word for that. But came from humble beginnings, and didn't really have a lot of options. And I discovered that the military was a viable option for me. It was a way out of West Virginia. there wasn't a lot of, jobs and opportunity, and I wasn't, my parents didn't have the money to send me to college. So I kind of just put it on myself, and actually I wanted to join the Marine Corps first. That was option A. And then that didn't work out. So I ended up joining the Army, man. And I think everything worked out the way it was supposed to.
When you decided to go into the military, did you have any preconceived notion of what the military was about? Anybody in your family talk to you about it? Was in the military? Do you have any, sort of guidance or counsel on this?
Yeah. My grandfather and some uncles had served. My dad is a pretty smart guy. He's a glass factory guy his whole life, but just from talking to his dad and, the uncles and the family and things like that. So probably my dad gave me the most counsel about joining the military. I think that was kind of his way of pushing me in a direction that he thought would benefit me the most. But the guidance back then, Mark, was like, hey, why don't you join and get a skill, and then you can get some college money, and then you come out and you're set. So that was kind of like the direction that he was pushing me. And then, things just took a turn, as they typically do when you join the military. So that was kind of the initial plan. It was actually, it's funny, you're going to laugh when you hear this, but it was, hey, why don't you be an air traffic controller in the Marine Corps? And that's what I tried to do, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, you signed up back in the Be All You Can Be days, and strangely enough, we're right back there again.
Yeah, right. It's funny how history repeats itself.
Right? The greatest advertising campaign in the history of advertising, Be All You Can Be, went away in favor of Army Strong, Army of One.
Yeah, I lost track.
I lost track, and now we're back at Be All You Can Be. So, Be All You Can. I say all that and I chuckle because, one of the main reasons, when I was disgruntled on active duty and this is a pre 9/11 world, as a lieutenant, outside of being a punk and a wise ass. I was disgruntled because I felt like that it wasn't the brochure. Like I wasn't being all I could be. Like it was just like you get up, you go to work, you work till 5 o'clock, you come home. It's like, this is not like what the commercials were saying, like it wasn't all this hoo-ah stuff and everything else. Like I'm sitting in the middle of Fort Hood, Texas, like rotting away and sweating, and we're not actually doing anything. So, it's interesting that you decided, to go the route that you did, because I was the opposite. Like I didn't have this misdirection. I initially signed up for ROTC just to help pay for college. I thought I would do 4 years and done. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks ago, I just hit 24 years of total service between the Guard and active duty. So
that's amazing. Thanks for your service, man.
Thank you. These things are going to work out. I've said repeatedly, the Army has a funny way and the military has a funny way of putting you where you're supposed to be. So
very true. Very true.
For you, you decided to be an infantryman. Did you know anything about the infantry? You just wanted to do it because it was cool, it was tough, or you were one of those guys who was like, hey, this is the ASVAB score I got, and this is all I was capable of doing?
Well, I think it was probably a combination of different things. The Marine Corps didn't work out, and then went towards the Army. And I think a guy that it was like a senior when I was a sophomore, he had ended up joining, and he was, somewhat close to me. So I was able to talk to him when he came back from basic training. I remember, words of wisdom that I still recall to this day was like, the green OD socks are pretty itchy. Didn't really have a lot. Like, is there anything else that you might be able to share with me from your basic training experience beside the socks were itchy? But, you hear from guys that they talk it up, and it's like, oh man, infantry, that's like the toughest. And, I played football my whole entire life. And I think I was kind of drawn to that, and probably drawn a little bit to the camaraderie that, what I was hearing described anyway. So the infantry seemed ideal as an ideal place for me.
So you end up branching infantry, the first couple of years of your career. Again, all this is in a pre 9/11 world. So without kind of glossing it over too much, what are some of the highlights early on of your career as an infantryman?
Yeah. So the first mission I ever completed, ironically, was a joint task force mission down on the border of Mexico. And, we thought that was a big deal because it was something different. It had a little bit of excitement to be down on the border, even though we weren't really involved. We were kind of like a static OP out in the middle of nowhere, just sweating to death and trying to avoid being bitten by rattlesnakes. But, there was nothing that we saw. There was nothing that we reported, but it had like a little bit of a flavor to it that wasn't like just normal training in the backyard. We also did like an exchange with the German army. So we did that for a few weeks. That was exciting. I'd never been overseas before. We did some training in Panama, and then they deactivated Fort Ord, California, and they shipped us all up to Fort Lewis, Washington. So I was up there for a year. Then I ended up PCS into Campbell, and probably one of the bigger highlights from my regular Army infantry days, we got to do 6 months in Sinai, Egypt, for the Multinational Force and Observer. So that was really cool. That was probably my really big first taste of leadership, because I showed up. I was an E5. I was a team leader, and then as soon as we showed up in Sinai, Egypt for our 6-month deployment, there was something wrong with our squad with our squad leader. I don't really recall exactly what his condition was, but I think it had something to do with Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So I got a secret phone call, in the middle of the night when I was on duty, and it was like, "Hey, I need you to secure this person's weapon, bayonet, all of those things. Someone will be there in a few hours, and they're going to pick him up, and he's going to take off." It was like, "Roger that." And then he ended up leaving, so I ended up taking the squad. So that was my first big dose of leadership. So
you find out what happened to him? Did he end up going to Desert Storm? Is that it?
Well, something had happened to him in Desert Shield, Desert Storm.
Okay.
Like 5 years previous, because I think we were in Sinai, Egypt, July of 95 to like January 96. I remember those dates only because my son was born. He was 3 weeks old, and then I left for 6 months. So it's kind of crazy, but yeah, those were some of the big highlights. I mean, like you said, Mark, pre 9/11, not a lot going on. So doing a border mission or doing an exchange, doing something in Sinai, Egypt was like, man, you felt big time. Like, man, we're doing something, we're contributing.
Right. When you were up at Fort Lewis, was the Ranger Battalion up there at that point in time?
They sure were. Yeah, we were.
Exposure to them? Did you go? And I'm only asking because it's a natural lead into the special operations community, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question because you're exactly right. That was my first exposure to special operations. Obviously first special forces group is at Fort Lewis as well, but they're such a different part of the compound or the base than I didn't even know where those guys were, but we were adjacent to 2nd Ranger Battalion. So that was my first exposure to the special operations community, with Ranger Regiment guys. And we were just like, holy cow, like these dudes are on a whole nother level, just seeing them do PT, and they had different PT gear. They wore the all black, silky shorts and t-shirts and all that type of stuff. So, yeah, man, those dudes were on a whole different level. So that kind of got my brain thinking a little bit like, maybe there is something there. I don't know if I could do what these guys are doing, but maybe there's an opportunity. And then that kind of, piqued my interest even more when I got to Fort Campbell, and I had a chance to be around 5th Special Forces Group because that's where they're headquartered. So yeah, I think you're right. That's a great question. It really got like the juice kind of flowing, like kind of seeing what other people are doing out there, In
a world where everybody has the same uniform, somebody wearing something different will always catch your eye. No idea why.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, who are those dudes in baseball caps and why?
Yes.
How come no one's yelled at them yet? They just seem walking around here in a baseball cap. I don't get it.
Yeah. And a few guys got beards. How's that?
I mean, he doesn't shave. He can't. Like, it's just, it's. I chuckle.
He must be a terrible soldier. Terrible soldier.
I chuckle at it just because it's something that, it's so beaten into your mindset about the way you're supposed to look as a soldier and everything else. And then we have these departures from that. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I don't know. Anyway, I'm on the back nine. I'm on the 18th tee of my career. So, I have a lot more reflexive mindset now than I ever did before. All right. So you ended up at Fort Campbell, you mentioned there, and then you decide to go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection. Now, how does that come to pass? Did you tell your command you wanted to do it? Was there a volunteer list? How does that all pass?
Yeah. So actually, I was gearing up while I was in Sinai, Egypt, since there's jack and, shit really to do over there. Right. So for 6 months, just training and got in ridiculous shape. And I was already in really good shape anyway from, being an infantry guy, being a young man. But had some bad luck toward the end of that Sinai trip. We started doing some fast roping. They started incorporating that a little bit, 101st air assault and all that stuff. But we did some fast roping like the week before we went home, and I ended up breaking my left fibula. So all of that hard work and effort and training that went into my prep for selection, that really kind of sidelined me. But luckily I recovered and did some physical therapy and did, picked up all of my training again, and actually had a really solid platoon sergeant that was a former Ranger Regiment guy that supported me. Now, that wasn't the entire chain of command. I heard all the comments. My company commander, who I think I just ran into last year, this is from the mid-90s. I still remember a comment that he had made, like, are you sure you want to go to Special Forces? Those guys never see their families, and divorce this, divorce that. Like, it was really discouraging. And I think, as I've reflected on that moment, I think it was kind of a way to, he knew exactly what he was trying to do. He was trying to discourage me and probably keep me in the company, but didn't really appreciate that. But some people were supportive. Luckily, I had a platoon sergeant that was. And I ended up going in the fall of 96 and was fortunate enough to get selected.
Okay. So how much studying did you do prior to assessment and selection? How much mental? Because again, I've talked to guys who say they do none. They just want to go in blind and see what's in front of them. Other guys want to have this base of knowledge about what they're walking into. Which one were you?
I didn't really know much. The recruiter guy that I was dealing with at Campbell was a guy that had been to selection before. So I tried to ask him, a few things. And
hey, is this a bad idea?
Yeah. Well, he had shared with me that, guys were putting like AA batteries in their gloves during team week. And he's like, man, don't cheat. Don't do any of those things. Those guys get caught. They're instantly dropped. And that, like, man, that scared me to death as because, if you just think about, like, you're a regular Army guy, you're used to doing what you're told, and, there's not really far left and right limits. Like, I was already pretty straight and narrow anyway. So when he told me, like, hey, don't do anything like that, I was like, man, I took that to the bank. Like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not going to jeopardize. I'm just going to do what I'm told. But I did a lot of rucking. Like, I was definitely ready for rucking. I was definitely ready for running and all of those things. I was never bothered by, doing land nav by myself or being out there at night by myself like that. I was never bothered by those things. So I was just hoping that, I wouldn't get injured, or, I mean, there's luck that's definitely involved. I'm sure you talk to a ton of dudes that there's a ton of luck that's involved, that, hey, you don't get a branch in the eye, or somebody doesn't fall, during pells of pain or sand babies, and they take out the back of your leg. And I mean, there's a ton of things that could go wrong. And I feel like I was more prepared. I didn't like really study the course or know a lot of guys that I could really get a lot of good intel from. But, I was more probably focused on the physical aspect and getting through that way and trying to stay healthy.
You survive the 3 weeks and you get in, obviously, right? They say, hey, you're good enough to go be a Green Beret. Then it's on to the Q course.
Yeah.
Did you know what you wanted to specialize in as far as in the Green Beret, whether it was demo, communications, medics? What was it?
Terrible decision here. Terrible decision. So if we got some young listeners out there on the hazard ground, hopefully they could hear my story and be like, man, what an idiot. I hope I don't want to do what that guy did. But I tried to game the system. So I was like, it seems like, from my West Virginia brain, that they're good on Bravos and Charlies, but they really need Deltas and Echoes. They need medics and comms guys. So it was like, I've done the communication stuff in the infantry, and I have a little bit of a base. So maybe if I'm like on the fence, like this guy's decent, but they see that I want to be a communication sergeant, then maybe they'll like that. I'll be more attractive to them, so they'll grab me. So was it in my heart of hearts to be a communication sergeant? No, but I thought that would make me more attractive as a candidate. So that's what I put down, and go figure. That's what I ended up getting. And, I had to suffer through those first few years on a team being the communications guy. Because in my mind, like communications was more like CCT, like combat controller, calling in airstrikes, killing bad guys.
Right.
Not like, hey man, here's my computer, or hey, it's missing cables. Hey, can you set this up for the presentation? Hey, my watch, my Sunto stopped working. Combo guy, fix it. Is like, man, it drove me crazy.
That's funny. Yeah. Listen, the Deltas that I remember, they set up we had our own private server, our own private hard drive, our own private everything was inside the Green Beret, the special ops community there. Everything was separate from what the rest of the regular Army was working on. So there was that. There was a lot of, different level of communication via email within the Green Beret community than there was in the regular Army community. That's for sure. You didn't need AKO. For those who want to date themselves, AKO, dear Lord. Anyway, okay, so you end up getting through it now. Where do you get your first assignment? And I know you go to 10th group because we talked about this, but did you choose 10th group? It chose you. How did it all go down for you?
I was one of those rare kind of people that went through the Q course. I actually had a letter of acceptance that was signed from the 5th group command sergeant major before I went. And he thought it was a joke actually when I went in there, because I went into his office as 11 Bravo infantry guy. Hey, sergeant major, I just went through selection. I want to come back. I want to be part of 5th group. And he was just like, really? Like he couldn't believe it. And he shared with me, he goes, hey, there's not a lot of guys that want to come to 5th group because, there's no women, there's no booze, all of those type of things. And I think he was probably kind of joking a little bit with me, but I think I kind of caught him off guard. I didn't think that he had a lot of dudes that came in his office asking to go to 5th group, but that's what I wanted to do. And part of it was, most of it was selfish. I was familiar with Fort Campbell at that time, because we weren't deployed like I was, getting ready to be. I was still hunting and fishing and going back home to West Virginia, which was like a 5-hour drive from Campbell for me. So selfishly, that made a lot of sense to me. But we were in Robin Sage, and the last phase of training, or it used to be. I don't know what it is now. I'm so far removed, but they called out my name, and I was waiting to hear 5th group, and they said, you're going to 1st Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group, Stuttgart, Germany, which I didn't even think was an option, like, to be forward deployed as a younger guy. But I think they just, it wasn't like I was a special breed or a special dude. It was just, they needed to fill some slots. So I got sent over there, and then I realized later on, it's like, hey, idiot, you didn't have like the highest DLAB score or whatever on the language side. So if so, you probably would have went to 5th group and you would have learned Arabic, but I was, my language was German, and I was assigned to Stuttgart. So I'm glad it all worked out that way.
I don't know anybody who went to 10th group who was disappointed with 10th group.
Yeah.
And for civilians listening, everything else, each Special Forces group is assigned to area of operations in the world. 5th group is Southwest Asia. Iraq, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, all the Middle Eastern countries where, again, there's no booze allowed. Because when you go to those countries, you're supposed to follow the laws of that country. Well, guess what? In Germany, there's a lot of booze. There's a lot of women. There's a lot of, that's the life of it's why every second lieutenant like me who got an order of merit list, my first 5 assignments were all in Germany. Because a 21-year-old single guy in Germany would have had a blast.
Yeah.
I got none of them, of course. I ended up at Fort Hood, as I mentioned a moment ago. But, we digress. So 7th group is what? South America?
South America, yeah. Not a bad group.
Not a bad one either. So they're all assigned to different areas of the world. And no, that's why I say nobody who's ever gotten 10th group was upset they got 10th group. And the sort of corporate culture of 10th group is different. It's a lot different than the other ones. Like, I can tell you this personally from my time. 5th group was very puckered up. Everything was a lot more regimented, and it was very closer to the regular Army garrison, the way those guys thought and acted and everything else. 10th group was a lot more chill, brah. Let's go skiing.
Especially 1st Battalion. 1st Battalion was definitely loose. I was pleasantly surprised when I got there. So
And for me, it was a little bit of a neutral drop, shift into reverse, going from 10th group to 5th group when they rotated out initially. Because I joined in on 10th group when I landed in Iraq, and they were there for about 3 months, 90 days. I was halfway through their tour. And then by the end of it, 5th group would come in and it was like, hey, you're doing all this shit wrong. I was like, oh, they just told me I was doing it right. Okay, now we got to do it different. Got it. Noted. So, yeah, the corporate culture is a little bit different. But you end up in Stuttgart, Germany. Now, you are there for 9/11, correct? You're still with 1st Bat 10th group?
Yeah, I was actually I was back in the States for 9/11. I was at the Advanced Non-Commissioned Officer course, ANOC, which is a requirement to become a sergeant first class. And that's where I found myself. I was like, I just flown back to the States the week before, 9/11. So, so it was crazy. I sat in a classroom. I was sitting in a classroom with guys from all the different groups, and like those old school TVs that they had on like the carts. We had an instructor that came in and interrupted the class that we were in and whispered something in the other instructor's ear, and it was kind of quiet. And then they wheeled in one of those TVs like you would like at a high school or middle school, and we watched the first plane had already hit, and then we watched the second plane hit, and man, that was just that was a punch in the gut.
Does your thinking shift quickly, like you personally? Does it shift quickly from, oh my God, look what's happening, to, hey, we're going to war? Like, how quickly does that happen for you?
Yeah, that was pretty quick. Like, everything's changed. Because up to that point, we were heavily involved in the Balkans, and we were doing some things in Bosnia. We were doing some things in Kosovo. It was really the only show in town. So it was kind of like the Super Bowl for us, and we kind of had the market on it. It was our AO, and I still remember, like, Kosovo, there was like one ODA, one Operational Detachment Alpha, one Special Forces team from 5th group that was in Kosovo because they were working with like the UAE or something. And it was kind of like, we owned it. It was our show. It was our AO. And I remember thinking back on 9/11, I was like, man, things have just changed. The theater focus is going to change. And, for some guys, they're going to have an opportunity. And I think I think I was a little bit optimistic, like maybe we'll be involved in this. But it took several years before 10th group was actually ever involved in Afghanistan. It was much, later, past my time. But I think that was the initial thoughts, though, Mark. It was like, man, everything's changed. This is going to be war. Like, here it is. It's
different than what you had in Kosovo. Obviously, most of that war was fought at 30,000 feet, and it wasn't really necessarily even done by us. And I probably shouldn't have glossed over Kosovo because it was your AO. And again, in the special ops community, again, we didn't do anything regular Army wise in Kosovo, but it was guys like you. And there was a lot of Air Force folks too, because again, a lot of it was done at 30,000 feet. But what were some of the natures of the assignments that you guys had to do? I mean, was it as simple as foreign internal defense and helping was Balkan people? Who were you helping there? I don't remember.
Yeah, so we had a little bit of a combination of everything. What we were actually doing in First Battalion, we were doing combat search and rescue. Like we were like the 911 force. Anytime it was like, hey, we're getting ready to bomb you if you don't do this, or okay, we're not going to bomb you. We're going to pull that back, or hey, 2 weeks later, we're going to bomb you. It seemed like we were the 911 force. So all of those threats going back and forth, the political maneuvering, we were the combat search and rescue package for the air war. So we spun up, we spun up a bunch of times, and we went down to San Vito, Italy, and we waited for the Air Force to do their thing. Eventually they started dropping bombs, and we provided combat search and rescue. Weird timing for my team, or the team that I was on. But there was 2 pilots that got shot down during the air war in Serbia, and it happened both times. It was our sister company that was on, So we would be either in San Vito, Italy, we'd have 3 days off, or you would be forward deployed in Tuzla in Bosnia, and that's where the combat search and rescue package was. So if a pilot went down, we had a whole crew, we had PJs, we had CCTs, special forces dudes. So that was the package. And both times the pilots got shot down, the other crew went in. So that was probably one of our main things that we did, was combat search and rescue. We did a little bit on the PIFWIC side, personnel indicted for war crimes. We did some intel collection on that, like pattern of life, trying to get locations and looking at different types of vehicles and things like that. So mainly kind of snoop and poop type things, nothing DA blowing gates and busting in doors, just pattern of life. And then I did counter sniper security for President Clinton in the late 90s when he did some kind of peace summit in Sarajevo, which was really interesting. We had all of these counter sniper teams aligned on Sniper Alley in downtown Sarajevo. So that was a really cool experience doing that. And then kind of fast forwarding over to Kosovo, did a little bit more on the PIFWIC side there. At this time, all of the national level assets were out of Bosnia. There was nobody in Kosovo except for us. So we kind of inherited a few PIFWICs, nobody major, but we did pick up a couple of guys, and that was fun for us. Did another counter sniper mission, counter sniper security mission. This is kind of a funny story. We did counter sniper security for President Bush 43 before 9/11. So this is sometime in 2001. I don't remember exactly when, but we just happened to be at Boston.
Window. It was inaugurated in January of 2001, so you had 10 months.
Tight window. But Bush 43 came to Bondstill while we were there in Kosovo, and at that time we were working with the guys from SEAL Team 2. So we had the outer cordon, which is typical for the Secret Service when they're overseas. They can't really handle kind of like the difficulty, I guess, of a mission like that with so many they need so many more assets. So we kind of helped plug some gaps for them. Green Berets and Navy SEALs, we did outer cordon. And that was a real interesting experience for me, because I remember from my position, I remember looking back at like the main stage, and it's just a sea of camouflage. And I think they gave President Bush 43, they gave him like a gray Army PT jacket. But I remember seeing the First Lady, Laura Bush, she was wearing all white. So she stuck out like crazy, but funny. So he was there. It was Bush 43, First Lady, Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld, all those guys, right? Well, interestingly enough, we were at the Texas Rangers game last week, and we had a board meeting, and we had like 6 Medal of Honor recipients that were sitting in our area, in our suite. And Wouldn't you know it? Who comes to pay a visit to us? President Bush 43 and the First Lady. So I actually had a chance, and I got a really
owns
cool
part
picture.
of the team, right? He still technically owns part of the Rangers.
I'm not for sure if he's part of the Rangers or not, man.
I mean, I know he was prior to.
He was prior
president.
I think he's really involved, especially. I mean, right now, man, they won today. They're burning it down. They're in first place. So, but you know, I got a great picture of this to prove this, Mark, just in case anybody doubts it. But I had a great chance to actually have probably a minute and a half conversation with the president. And I said, hey, sir, I know you don't remember me. You would never remember me. But I actually had a chance, and it was a great honor for me to provide counter sniper security for you back in 2001 in Kosovo. And I started getting ready to tell him like the people that were there. And he started naming them off. He goes, oh yeah, that was the trip with me. And Laura was there and Condi and, blah, blah, blah. And he remembered. And I was like, well, this might sound weird, sir, but I do remember exactly what the First Lady was wearing. She was wearing all white. It kind of made me nervous, but it was really cool to have that exchange with him. And then, of course, we got over to what I'm doing now. And he's like, hey, let's get this museum built, man. Let's quit messing around. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure, later. But it was a really cool exchange that I had. So that was one. We also did some reconnaissance. That was primarily what we were doing in Kosovo.
What's great about that, and again, I don't think, because Special Forces has taken on a whole life of its own now, right? Because it's so magnified in the media and everything else, and they've been used in so many different ways than really ever genuinely intended. The stuff you were doing in Kosovo is pure SF Green Beret mission skill set. It's what you guys trained on. It's what you worked for. Like, the kicking indoors stuff in Baghdad and bringing bad guys to justice. Sure, that direct action stuff, that's always cool. And anybody who has that bone in their body of wanting to bring bad guys to justice, right? Or has a draw to combat itself, understands that and do it. But by nature, that's not necessarily an SF mission. Like, that's more, right. Believe it or not, that is more, whether you want to call it Navy SEAL and Delta type stuff, but Green Beret's a little bit of a different skill set. And I hear you talk about this, and I'm like, it seems like, and I could be wrong, obviously, because I'm not in the SF community now or anywhere near it, but these missions seem like a relic of a time gone by for Green Berets. Yeah,
but I'm glad that we had a chance to do these missions, because I think it really just made us more well-rounded. I kind of felt bad for the guys that grew up and they only seen a few, like Baghdad trips and things like that. And then they go somewhere else and they're like, hey, we're not doing that anymore. Like we were,
I've got to go sit in some remote country and figure my way out. No, yeah, we're not just, looking for bad guys. Right. It's a different world.
Yeah. So that was basically the highlights, though. We did a lot of reconnaissance work. We had a chance to do a little bit of everything. And I feel like it was, it really made us more well-rounded as Special Forces guys. So it was all good. It definitely helped prepare for what was to come, later on.
All right. So 9/11 happens, and now you're back at Fort Carson. And you mentioned
Stuttgart.
Sorry. You mentioned a moment ago, though, that like you felt like, everything was changing. The theater of operations was now changing. At least the focus was going to be Iraq. Well, initially Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
Which is way out of 10th Group's realm. Did you guys think, hey, we're never going to end up there just because it's not RAO and we don't have to worry about it kind of deal? Was that your initial feeling?
It was, man. It was definitely, because I ended up staying in 1st Battalion. I got there in the fall of 98 and I left in the fall of 2002.
Okay.
So, from what was it, October of 2001 all the way up until I left, there was no talk. There was nothing about 1st Battalion, 10th Group doing anything in Afghanistan.
Right.
And actually, one of the things that I did that we were tasked to do, and I remember this specifically, one of our SF brothers, Stanley Harriman, was killed early in the war. I don't recall if it was 01 or 02, but he was one of the earlier KIAs on the Special Forces side. And because he was a Green Beret and we were Green Berets in Germany, we were tasked to go up to the airport and bring him off the plane. And that was an honor. But at the same time, it was like, like inside, I think all of us, we didn't really even have to say it. But at the same time, it was like, man, we're not in the war, and our brothers are getting killed and we're doing this type of detail. So it was kind of a kick in the shorts a little bit. I mean, we were honored to do it. It was a privilege, but at the same time, it was like, man, we would have rather been there fighting, but that's just the way it was. And then in the fall of 2002, I left Germany and arrived at Fort Carson. And it was a totally different world, man. I walked into a battalion and a company in a team room, and I was late to the party, dude. Like everybody was, hey, we're doing train up for Iraq. There's going to be an invasion soon, and welcome to the team, and let's get ready to go do this Iraq thing. And I was like, well, hey, what are you guys talking about? Like there was that kind of beating of the drum, I guess, that had been going on, but it was like, oh, so we get to do this, so it was interesting. It was fresh, and I was blown away at first, and then it was like, all right, buckle up, here we go.
When do you get to your first Iraq deployment?
Our first, we did the initial infill
right
into Iraq, so that was March. We pre-staged, we left Carson. Right. We pre-staged in Romania, and then we eventually went to Jordan, and then we flew in my least favorite operation name, Operation Ugly Baby. That was the initial infill into northern Iraq. It's the dumbest name ever. That's why probably no one knows of it or has heard of it, but it was the longest air infiltration since World War II.
Wow.
On the special ops side.
Explain that. Meaning what?
So the initial plan was, Mark, we were going to fly in and stage in Turkey, because we were going to be, our plan was to link up with the Kurdish Peshmerga up north, right, and keep all of those Iraqi divisions up north, instead of like, hey, there's no Americans here. Oh. So we're going to flood down to Baghdad and reinforce, because that's the center of gravity.
Okay. Let me just set some background for the civilians, people who don't understand what's going on. So in northern, Iraq was basically divided into three secular divisions, right? You had the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. The Kurds basically stayed in the northern part, of Iraq. You talk to the Mosul area up to the Iraq-Turkey border right up there. Kurds were a lot more friendly. They were a lot more pro-American. They were a lot more westernized, as opposed to Sunnis and Shias, who constantly battled it out for control. Saddam was a Sunni. He had a Sunni government. The Sunnis and Shias hated each other, and the Kurds are sitting there going, hey, we're all fine up here. Just leave us alone and we won't bother you. And there's always been an argument for years about maybe they should have split Iraq into three separate areas for the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shias, and everybody would live peacefully, kind of like Israel and Palestine kind of deal, whatever. I say all this to say, for the audience who isn't aware, that the idea of working with the Kurds was, for us, was, hey, we could actually, come from the north, and if we were struggling, we'd have major reinforcements that were on our side that didn't mind going to take out Saddam, because, we had this sort of in-bed Iraqi force that was willing to fight with us. So I just wanted to set that for the audience, but go ahead.
Yeah, that was great, man. That was a quick lesson right there. That was great stuff for the casual person that's not familiar. Like that was a great rundown. But that was definitely,
not everybody in Iraq wanted hated Americans, right? Like there was a good portion of people who were like, hey, please help us, thank you.
Definitely the Kurdish Peshmerga, because we'd been helping them with that, enforcing the no air, the flight zone and all of those things. So yeah, they were definitely friendly, and they welcomed, and they wanted us to be there. So, but the plan was, we were going to infill in from Turkey into northern Iraq and link up with our Kurdish Peshmerga, and then start creating some havoc and keep all of those Iraqi divisions up there, against us. And we were going to use a lot of air power and all those type of things. But at the, I don't remember exactly when it was, but Turkey said, hey, you can't use our airspace, you can't use our land. you're not going to do it. So you need to think of something else. So at the last minute, they had to kind of come up with a Hail Mary plan. Like, how are we going to get, second and third battalion special forces and a battalion from third group, how they were going to get us all into northern Iraq so we could link up with our Kurdish Peshmerga. So they figured out, we flew into Jordan, and I guess on a map they said, man, that's one ugly baby. So that's what I heard. That's how it got its name, Operation Ugly Baby. But we had to fly in.
Staff officers, right? Staff officers.
That's what I blame, dude. It had to have been a staff officer.
They're a weird breed.
So we flew in.
Somebody wrote that on their OER, by the way. Coined the term.
Yeah. Somebody
got credit.
Definitely has that.
Yeah. And they got credit. Embarrassingly enough, somebody actually probably put that on there as a source of pride while everybody else was laughing at that moron.
I would love to know who it was, but yeah, so we ended up flying in, and the problem was, Mark, our air power didn't have enough time to like soften up all of the targets. It's a whole entire country of targets for them to hit, and they couldn't take out all of the AAA, the anti-aircraft artillery, and they couldn't take, they couldn't destroy, more vehicles and Iraqi soldiers and all those type of things. So there was still a lot of enemy defense that was there. So we had to fly the western part of Iraq up to the north, and then we kind of hung a right at Mosul, and we, went into what they'd call Kurdistan, where the Kurds were. In Erbil and that type of area. But I think it was like 6 hours, but we really got shot up pretty bad that whole entire way. Well, the first part we didn't, everything was fine, but the flight, they were flying so low. They were flying right on the floor of the desert, 200 feet, 300 feet. I mean, it was low. And then they had to take a lot of evasive action, and all the planes got hit. One of the planes got hit so bad they actually had to declare an emergency, and at least Turkey did allow them to come in to land that plane. But we finally made it after several hours. Terrible flying. I'm still not a fan of flying to this day. If the plane does any type of jerky action, I instantly think back to those days, because it wasn't like we were sitting in the seat of an airplane, like popcorn and drinks. Like, there was no seats. We were sitting on equipment or sitting on our butts on the belly of the plane, and we were probably snap linked in so we wouldn't get thrown around. But it was definitely an intense flight, and I was so damn happy to land in Kurdistan and eventually get off that plane, man. It was something for sure.
All right, so you get down there in Iraq for the invasion. Take me through kind of what your mission was, what you guys were supposed to do, and how it all unfolds for you.
Yeah, bad memories here, man. Bad memories. We were like the redheaded stepchild team for the battalion, not just like redheaded stepchild for the company. But before I got there, so I was getting punished for stuff that, and it was a terrible accident. I mean, someone got hurt really, really badly, a Green Beret.
How?
Before I got there, they were doing some training at Fort Carson, and they were doing something with munitions. It was like a newer munitions. I think it was something like maybe the Slam or something like that. I really don't even know that much about it, but whatever this new munition technology was, but whatever it was, the Charlie on the team that I ended up going to, I won't say his name, but there was a terrible accident and he was blown up. He survived, and I think he's fine. He's missing some parts, but there was this terrible incident, and our medic had to save his life. Thank God that, 18 Deltas, our medics, our special forces medics are so great, because he saved this dude's life. Because the medevac birds, because it was an explosion, they were worried about landing. So there was delays. There was all kinds of crazy stuff. But because of that incident, which happened several months before I even got there, our team leader and our team just had like a bad mark. It was like can't trust these guys. They, one of their own got blown up. So we were kind of like just pushed to the side. And while our brother and sister teams were out there calling in airstrikes and killing tanks, and our Halo team in our company is famously known in '03 for being at Tobacco Pass. They had tanks coming their way, and they were killing tanks with javelins and stuff like that. It's actually it's a good friend of mine. His name's Eric Stragati. Has a couple of tank kills under his belt. But while they were doing that, guess what we were doing? We had to set up an enemy prisoner of war camp. That was what our special forces team mission was. So that's how much we were in the doghouse. And it was
that is bastard redhead stepchild kind of stuff right there.
It was painful, bro. It was painful. And we would see those guys come back from being, forward. And, like one of the guys I remember, he had like all of his DCUs were bloodied, and he was carrying like a Russian sniper rifle or something. It's like, oh man, here we are down here at the enemy prisoner war camp, and we got like one person, because the Kurds, they weren't going to pass over anybody to us. They had their own techniques and how they like to deal with people. And I'm not saying that all bad, like, oh, they were going to beat them and torture them to death, but they have their own ways they do it, and they build relationships, or, whatever they do. But I think we had one like mid-level, probably like the equivalent of a staff sergeant E6, bath party dude. And that's who we were responsible for. It was terribly painful. I was somewhat bitter. Toward the end, once we kept advancing, or once the teams kept advancing and making progress and just, wiping out tons of Iraqi units, when we were getting ready to move into Mosul is when we finally had our chance to, like, by this time, the 173rd had jumped in. Not going to make any negative comments about those guys. 173rd had jumped in.
I didn't know there were negative comments to be made.
Well, I'm not saying it, but other people are like, hey, these dudes had a combat jump. They jumped in. You guys were already there and secured the drop zone. And that's what other people say. I'm not going to say anything negative about the 173rd.
Well, okay. I'll just provide my own personal commentary here. You don't have to say anything negative.
Okay.
That's a whole bunch of badge. I'll just call it it's crap. Like, great. I have badges I never wear. Like, and I learned that more than anything from the Green Beret community, right? I have a combat action badge. I never wear it. I have other badges. I just don't put them on. Like, I don't care. Like, I get it's important. Infantrymen want a CIB. I get it. Combat jumps as a badge. It's important. It's a thing on the record that you want to have. I get it. But then we get into this intra-agency pissing contest between each other over little things like that. To me, and this is just Mark's opinion, I think everybody should have the opportunity if it organically presents itself, right? But there are too many people who try to force a situation to happen. Again, like, oh, let's just get you on ground, infantryman. Let's get you on ground. Let's get you outside the wire, fire one shot, and we can write up your CIB. Like, we are working too hard for things that aren't genuinely all that important. So that's the only comment. When you put the context to it, I knew what you were talking about. I get why you won't say anything negative. You don't have to. Military guys understand it. I just wanted to paint it for everybody else.
Yeah, when those guys came in, and I think we had some 10th Mountain guys that eventually came up north as well. So I believe that's actually who we did our transition with was the 10th Mountain. They took the little baby enemy prisoner war camp that we had, and we actually one of the first things that we got to do was liberate, if you will, Altoon Capri, a city that was toward the west. No big deal. It was insignificant. I mean, there was no one there. We saw some equipment and things like that. But then we actually went in and took Mosul. That was a little bit interesting, going in there en masse to take the airport. So that's when we actually got to kind of do what we thought, at least what I thought special, like what I was here to do was,
Right.
Like the Mosul action. We were involved in a very minor skirmish that wasn't that big of a deal, but we did have a firefight when we went into Mosul. I thought it was going to be much, much worse. I mean, that first night that we drove into the airport, it was like Escape from New York. People are out on the streets and they're around barrels with fire, and everyone and their brother has AKs because they're allowed to have AKs. So
it's Iraq.
Yeah, it's Iraq, and it's a war, but that's when I first was like, okay, we have something going here. But then the 101st, General Petraeus, all those guys stormed up, and we were doing a lot of patrolling in and around Mosul, and everybody was looking for weapons of mass destruction. And it's funny, I will tell you this. We were stopped, I don't even know how many times, Mark. We were stopped by people that, waving their arms like frantically, and they wanted to talk to us. And we're driving around in soft skin vehicles, by the way. We're in these little Toyota Hilux vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
But, we would figure out what they're talking about, and they were wanting to report like weapons of mass destruction. And it was like, man, this is such a great lie. Like, everybody really thinks that they're here. I mean, even the people in this country think that they're here, but we could never find anything. I do think one of our most significant mistakes early on, we didn't have the capacity, man. We didn't have the capacity to deal with the munitions. I mean, I remember so many times driving by just like tons of RPGs and explosives. Like,
yeah,
dude, we just,
that's, I mean,
anything with it.
I said, I would say this, when you talk about weapons of mass destruction, I would argue it depends on your definition of mass, right? Like, if you're thinking about nuclear, biological, chemical, no, you're not going to find them, because even if they did have them, they probably hit them all much better than we could have found, or dismantled them all, or whatever. But when you talk about some of these weapons caches, Darrell, and you know this, you're like, this is Fort Knox kind of weapons cache. Like, like it's more than you could comprehend. And you would sit there and look at this thing and go, how the hell are they going to fire all these things? Like, there's not enough people to. So yes, could you create mass destruction with that? Sure, you could, if you wanted to. You guys ever seen, 3 or 4 155 rounds blow up with a 5-gallon gas can? That's pretty destructive, if you ask me. I mean, but what do I know? I mean, that's not what they were talking about when they said weapons of mass destruction. But lo and behold, there were plenty of those things running around, and enough for us to run over on a routine basis. That's for damn sure. So It depends on your definition of mass when we say mass destruction.
Yeah, I hope that's, in the history books, or it's an after action review. Because if you're going to go into any country, and if you don't have a plan to deal with all of that, because looking back, Mark, I know the same thing I'm getting ready to say here, but somebody had to deal with those. A lot of guys and gals had to deal with all of those explosives that we couldn't secure, and a lot of people had to eat that, and it cost a lot of people their lives. It cost a lot of people their limbs, and I don't have all the answers, but.
No,
I wish that there was something, hopefully people are learning those lessons.
It just, it's political. It's semantics. It's a whole bunch of different things. And I'll say it very simply. To those of us on the ground, politics and semantics don't mean shit. You can kiss my ass with your politics and semantics. It's about me keeping my ass alive and everybody else who was with me. So whether you think it's mass destruction or not, it's the war that we had to fight on the ground. And that's different than politics and semantics could ever, they can't bridge that gap any size, way, shape, or form. So there is that. All right. So the first part of your first deployment to Iraq ends in Mosul and everything else. You end up getting back. Is your next one in 06? You have another one in between there?
No, actually, we finished that up. I think we spent a couple of months there, and then we redeployed to Carson. And then we did a Kosovo trip.
Oh, wow.
In between. Yeah.
Giggles, huh?
We still had the Kosovo responsibility. So we did that. And then the next time I was in Iraq, which was my second trip, was late 04, early 05. And
Okay.
we were out at KMTB. I don't know if you're familiar with this place, Kirkush Military Training Base out on the border of Iran, Balad Ruz, Mandalay. It was east of Bakuba, if
Yep.
for those listening that might be familiar with Iraq, but it was actually
Just for reference, Bakuba's about 45 minutes to an hour northeast of Baghdad.
right.
If you look on a map, it's right there.
Yeah. So we were in like a little sleepy place. There wasn't a whole lot going on. And I remember the group commander at that time was really contemplating hard, man. He was like, man, he's like, looking at a chessboard and he's got all of his chess pieces and he wants a lot of shit happening, right? And here we are in this little sleepy town, and he really wanted us to move us closer to Bakuba because there was a lot going on there.
Well, there was a lot of bad dudes in Bakuba.
Yeah.
Filled. It was one of those towns in Iraq that you never heard in. You knew Sadr City, right? You knew the Sunni Triangle. You knew the area. Like, those are the ones that the news reported on that had bad dudes in it. Bakuba, you never heard about it in the news. A whole lot of bad dudes hanging out in Bakuba. There was a whole lot of dudes. It was your basic ghetto slum with bad dudes, bad terrorists, just living it up.
Let me test your memory, Mark. I want to see if you remember this public affairs media fiasco that happened in late 04. Do you remember in 04 a unit that was getting ready to rotate into the box, getting ready to rotate into Iraq? I think they were pre-staged somewhere, like they were in Saudi or whatever. But the Secretary of Defense, Rumsfeld, came and talked to them. And a kid from that unit asked him, sir, what about the armor for our vehicles? Like, we don't have armor. It's like hillbilly armor. Do you remember like that whole media just
vaguely? Yes.
Yeah. Well, I only say that. I was kind of just joking around with you a little bit, but the only way I remember that is because my 04-05 rotation at KMTB, we were there with the 278 Regimental Combat Team out of Tennessee. Great people, but it was one of their soldiers that put the SecDef on the spot about the hillbilly armor. So they kind of were like, man, they had a black eye and they had a big hole to dig out of because of that soldier. I mean, you know how it goes, but
yeah, well, those are the good old days. Is this deployment fairly uneventful for the most part?
Oh man, another bad one, man.
And bad one in terms of like you didn't really do anything.
Didn't do a whole lot. I mean, we were trying to.
Also, you have to remember two things, and I'll give you a little background here. When you hit 04, remember the main portion of fighting. We invaded in March 03. May 03 was mission accomplished, the banner, right? And then it was just hanging around. Like we didn't know what to do for a solid 8 to 12 months. We didn't do anything. Like we didn't know what to do. We didn't have a plan to get out. We weren't leaving. We were just there hanging out. It was fairly peaceful, all things considered.
It was.
Once you got to the latter part of 04 is when a lot of Iraq people started getting pissed. Be like, you guys need to get the F out. Like, if you're going to be here, we're going to start, I don't need you here anymore. You did your stuff. Get out.
You're right, man. You're right. We did have some success. So I'm probably downplaying this a little bit. I was doing a lot of targeting and, we were talking to local Iraqis and we actually exhausted all of the bad guys in our area. Like, and it wasn't violent. I mean, we rolled most of the guys up without, firing a shot or anything like that. But there's one mission in particular. We knew we were getting a lot of reporting and people thought we were crazy. I mean, absolutely. It was like, hey, this is our higher calling us. Do you really want to put AMZ, talking about Zarqawi, do you really want to put AMZ in your report that he's driving in 2 vehicles or whatever? I mean, it was that level of like oversight and disbelief. Like, anything with Zarqawi, who, for the listeners out there, was the most wanted guy in Iraq, probably the same, not the same level of bin Laden, but I mean, I guess he was the bin Laden of Iraq. He was the number one guy that we were after. So, but we were getting that reporting in that area. like something's going on. There's meetings and it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's just lots of space. Well, there was one day in particular, Mark, that's kind of like my punch in the balls day. The team was going on kind of like a confidence target, if you will, with, all kinds of Iraqi army soldiers, our special forces team, the guys from the 278th. And it was basically like a confidence target. We're going to look for some caches and do this and do that, small type of thing. And me being the arrogant E7 that I was at this time, I was like, that shit's below me. I'm not going to do a cache recovery training with the Iraqi army because I was more on the targeting side. And I was like, I'm not doing that. That's dumb. And I gave my seat in the Humvee to an E7 from the 278th Regimental Combat Team, like their S2 guy. And what happens that day? Daylight op, they run into a no kidding Al-Qaeda training camp in the middle of flipping nowhere. It's like a L-shaped ambush is what they ended up running into. And our team with the 278th and the Iraqi army killed 25 dudes with machine guns, AKs, mortars, vehicles with all kinds of equipment. I mean, a couple guys squirted, and to this day, I'm still wondering, like, man, they were protecting somebody very, very valuable. Don't know who it was. I will say that later on, Zarqawi was killed in that Bakuba area, which wasn't the area that I'm talking about right now, but, it was close. But these were hardcore foreign fighters that these guys ran into. Now, I will say this, unfortunately, there was 2 guys killed from the 278th in a trench because it was trench fighting, grenade tossing. And guess what Darrell's doing? Darrell's working the radios, trying to help the team with air support and helos and all of that. I eventually got out there in the evening, me and a partner, we got out there in the evening and we cleared all the targets the next day. But just, to kind of give a little taste, like, oh, I missed that one,
Okay. But there's twofold here, I mean, let me just play devil's advocate. You basically, and I'm not gonna say abdicated responsibility, but you passed on a mission that you easily could have gone on. Not only did you miss a firefight, but other dudes got hurt in it. Was there any sense of maybe that doesn't happen if you're there?
No, I mean, the guy that took my seat, he stayed back. Like, none of our guys got hurt. I think we might have I think maybe our team sergeant was awarded a Silver Star, and I think he did get a Purple Heart later for some hearing or maybe some fragment. But like the guy that replaced me, that he wasn't a casualty. It was the 278, like the infantry, the fighter guys that were actually up there engaged. But I think my regret was more like, man, that's my team. I should have been there. From what I heard, they performed, exceptionally well, and everybody did a great job, and everybody was in the fight. So yeah, it was just one of those things. Like, man, I missed it, and it hurts. And I tell this story, so hopefully there's some listeners out there, especially if there's some military folks, like, hey, be very careful if you're going to be a little bit arrogant and think something's below you. You just never know, man. You never know what's going to happen. And when you're in combat, man, it's, you just never know.
100%. Okay. So then you end up, I want to fast forward because you end up getting back to Iraq in 06. And this is interestingly enough where we ended up crossing paths, but not knowing it until, maybe an hour ago. I had gotten there in March of 05. Somewhere in that range. And again, it was 3rd Battalion, 10th Group was there at the time. And I had worked with those guys. I'd have to go back and look at my journal. I do remember some of the names of the folks who were there.
Where were you at, Mark?
I was at RPC. I was with the big palace on the hill.
Oh yeah.
We were over there. That's where we were headquartered. Now, I was, I was running the B team. I was with the B team and running the forward logistics element there. So I was in the support center, and a lot of my doings every day were more confined to support missions, running convoys and things of that nature. But I also built the support battalion for the ISOF brigade. That was the one. That was the one mission that I had that I was fortunate enough to, help write the MTO, assign all the vehicles and all the equipment and everything you got from that level to putting these guys through, me and 211 Bravos, putting these guys through basic FM 7-8 infantry tactics and how to survive in combat kind of deals and run convoys, because that's what the support battalion was supposed to be doing. So, that was it was an incredible mission. I'll say it repeatedly. In 24 years, that was the best 15 months of my life. It was the most impactful 15 months of my life, and I wouldn't be where I am today without it.
Yeah, sounds like it, man. Sounds like it.
It was one of those things where, you kind of get thrown into the deep end, but here's the interesting part too. I didn't know really what I was getting into when I was there. And I didn't really understand how the environment until I was there. It was funny. I don't know if I've ever told this story before, but I remember they needed somebody to be a contracting officer, and I had never done the job, but people had told me what I was supposed to do. I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. Like, I can handle that. I can negotiate. I can do this. I had asked one of the O4s in the Green Beret realm about it. I said, look, I'll do that. I don't mind. And I think he took it as an affront of, oh, this guy's just looking for the easiest route and wants to do X, Y, and Z and doesn't want to do any work. And he flat out told me, no, you're not getting that job. You're going to go over here now and work in the sports center. I was like, okay. Cause I remember hearing back, I'm like, yeah, they didn't really like the way you went about that. I'm like, really? I didn't realize I was doing it wrong. I thought that was the job I was supposed to do. Like, I was really naive, and super naive to the environment that I had walked into. And it ended up working out in my favor, because I ended up, taking this job in the sports center. And it was one of those things where it was like, you're getting thrown into the fire. Not only are you not going to be behind a desk doing a contracting hours, you're going to be outside the wire like 4 or 5 days a week, putting your ass on the line here.
For sure.
And that was an unnerving sort of thing initially for me. I didn't really know what I was getting into. And I was fully admittedly way out of my depth at the start. And I thankfully had another captain who was there who was very much willing to hold my hand as we did a right seat, left seat ride until those guys had popped smoke and gotten out of town. He was a chemical officer. His name was Tim Sikorsky. And he was running the support center at the time, and I just basically backfilled him. But, it was one of those things where he showed me the ropes and I was able to pick it up on my own. But it was, one of these things where I quickly learned, hey, shut your mouth, do your job, don't ask for anything, and just go to work every day. And if you put your head down, you do that, and they see you do it and you do it well, everything's gonna be okay.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Well, I know for a fact, man, that was what you were doing. That was, and I benefited from all your hard work, by the way, in 2007 when I did the ISOF Recce mission. But in 2006, I got to see exactly what you were doing. And that's, man, those dudes running those convoys in Baghdad, that's not an easy thing to do. That's not an easy life. And
I probably have about 5 or 6,000 miles of road time through in and around Baghdad. It was,
yeah, man, that's not easy. That's not easy. No way.
It wasn't trips to Balad back and forth, Fallujah, Ramadi, all the way up to Taji, Bakuba area, down to south, Matmadiya, Radwaniya, all those areas. It was everywhere we went. We just went by car, like I wasn't taking a lot of choppers anywhere.
Yeah, and that's areas that a lot of guys are like, oh boy, we're going to go into, Fallujah, or we're going to Bakuba. We got to go to Balad. That means we got to go through here. Like, those are areas, man, that a lot of guys are just like, oh, and and I like to say too, sometimes, like, we had some assets, or like our national level assets, where you have the support and you have air assets and all of those type of things. Like, man, what a great benefit that is when you don't have to worry about some of the other things. I'm not saying that it made it, less dangerous or whatever, but
No,
Just continually driving, man, you're rolling the dice every day.
Yeah, there was that sense of impending doom always. And I'll set it up for your deployment this way, because again, 05 and 06 really had started the height of the violence preceding the surge in 07, right? And so you mentioned the danger, but it was you had Marines being hung from the bridge in Fallujah, right? You had that going on. You had the bombing of the Samara Mosque. You had a whole bunch of these seminal really events that were just, things that you heard about on the news that were, things that everybody was talking about, and we're living there through this whole thing. So again, I had 2nd Battalion, 10th Group there when I first started. Sorry, 3rd Battalion, 10th Group there when I first started. Went to 2nd Battalion, 5th Group. And after they left, 3rd Battalion, 10th Group had come in. I'm sorry, 2nd Battalion. Let me do 310, 25, 210. So you guys had come in, and I remember too, the previous battalion commander had from 5th Group had set your battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Swindell, up with the knowledge that, hey, at least these National Guard guys, this guy at least knows what the hell he's doing. You can trust him. He's good. And, it was one of those things. Again, I was fortunate enough to be pulled along on a whole lot of things I shouldn't have been doing, pulling security on, late night missions and raids and everything, like, being interrogations. Like, I was just, because I was around and I was capable. They're like, hey, Mark, let's go. And I said, okay, all right. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, I just keep looking. I didn't want to tell anybody. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just sort of faking it until I made it, or until I got made, one or the other. But it all ended up working out. And I'll say this about Colonel Swindell and his staff. God, I can't remember the major's name. I want to say it started with a B. It was like Bilecki or Bilecki or something like that. He was the XO. I could see his face, and he had a full, thick head of black hair. Anyway, I have a
Illinois.
That's it, Major Bellinoy. That's it. You got it. I knew it started with a B. Yes,
that's all you needed was to give me that B.
He was the XO. I talk with him a lot, and
I think Taft was the S3, maybe.
Yep,
Taft, John Taft, maybe.
Sounds about right. When it was all said and done, and we were getting ready to leave, Swindell had walked up to me, and he signed a whole bunch of paperwork he signed my combat action badge. He signed verifying all this, that, and the other. And, he got us our patches that we talked about, pissing contests with patches and badges. My soldiers were bitching about wanting to wear the SF patch. I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter. Like, but he ended up agreeing to sign it all for it. So, he was very, accommodating in that sense. But I'll never forget, he pulled me aside, about 2 weeks before we were leaving. And he looked me dead in the eye, and he said to me, Mark, if you want to go to assessment and selection, I'll get you a slot. Just say the word. And I was blown away.
That's a hell of a compliment, Mark.
It was really like, I was like, I didn't know what to say. That's a hell of a compliment. The fact that he had thought of me as one of his own, or at least capable enough to be one of his own, was the ultimate compliment for me. I took a day and I thought about it, and I asked, like, what is the whole process? How does it work? This, that, and the other. Could I still do it in the Guard? Do I need to go active duty kind of deal, and everything else? And ultimately, I went back to him and I told him, and I turned it down. And I said, sir, I'm so grateful, and I can't believe you would think of me. And I explained to him, I said, look, I got to be honest. Like, I'm torn between what I want to do with the rest of my life and this, because I was literally in love with what I was doing there. Like, eventually it probably ended up in me getting blown up and dying. But, while I was there, I was absolutely in love with the job that I had in front of me. And I was good at it, and I could do it really well. But I told him, I said, look, I can't accept this. Even if I could do it in the Guard and just, do it part-time and take the school, whatever it is, you go to your 3 weeks of assessment selection, go to the Q course. I said, I don't know if I can devote the level of dedication and of your life that is needed to do this really well. And I don't want to disrespect that process or anybody else who's going through that process by me being not able to give it the attention it deserves. And I didn't feel like it was right for me to even accept the offer, because there was part of me that thought that I don't know if I would ever see this all the way through to the level that these guys do. Because I didn't know if my heart was 100 in a year down the road when I'm not in Baghdad anymore, is my heart still going to be in it the same way? And I didn't want to start it and then have to walk away that's a reflection on him. That's a reflection on all the other Green Berets for me to walk out of there and not do it. But I'm sorry for taking up your time in storytelling with that.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's a hell of a compliment. And I got to ask you if you remember. Do you remember who the battalion commander was from 5th Group by any chance?
Barry Naylor.
It was Miller?
Naylor, Naylor, Barry Naylor.
Naylor. Okay. Because I read I forgot the name of his book, but I read Miller's book, the SecDef. And I think that he was in like the SecDef for Trump for like 3 months. I think that he was in that position at some point as a 5th Group battalion commander. But maybe it was a previous rotation.
He was a guy you could pick. He was a dude I think he was from Tennessee, but he had this thick Southern drawl. And the only reason I remember his name is because the OER he wrote me with his senior rater comments were so glaring that people in my state questioned whether it was real. When the OER got sent back, they're like, who? I remember my XO said to me, "Who'd you blow to get this OER?" And I'm like, it was
another great compliment. It sounds weird, but it's a great compliment.
I was like, no, it's real. Like, honestly, he really wrote it and signed it because he literally said it was in the top 10% of captains that I senior rate to include Green Berets.
Man, that's legit, dude.
Listen, I didn't, whatever. But it was that whole environment that just I learned to thrive well in, and I learned a ton from them, and they molded me as an individual and as an officer and a leader for the rest of my career. And I'm eternally grateful for the whole experience. I'm thankful that I'm, all in one piece for the most part. Bumps and bruises, of course, but fully intact otherwise. And again, just an experience that I wouldn't trade and couldn't trade. I said for years, if you laid out all the assignments in Iraq at the time before I got there, it said, Mark, pick one. I couldn't have picked a better one on my own. There was no way I would have found a better one than where I landed. So very fortuitous in that sense. Now, back to you, because I had left, I want to say April 12th.
Of 06 or 05?
Of 06, April 12th of 06. And literally, I remember I had rolled over an IED again. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That wasn't it. Yes, rolled over an IED literally 3 days before that.
3 days before you left?
3 or 4 days before I left.
Holy shit.
I'll never forget there was a New York Times reporter in the Green Zone who wanted to come check out the ISAF brigade. And the company commander, and I forget his name, but he said to me from 10th group, from 2nd Bat 10th group, the Alpha Company commander, he said to me, he said, why don't you just take your support battalion guys and have them go pick them up, show them that they can do it alone.
That was Phil Mala.
I think that sounds about right.
Blonde hair, muscles, cats.
Everybody had blonde hair and muscles back then.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I'm like, really, sir? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, all right. So he wants me to just go. And I remember I was so pissed that I had to do it because I didn't want to do it. And I'm like, just to get a freaking reporter. And I made every bad leader mistake you can make. Didn't take an interpreter, didn't take a map, didn't take a compass, didn't take anything. I said, guys, let's just get in the cars and go. Run to the green.
About Irish. Boom.
Come on, boom, there and back, right? Get there, no problems. On the way out, we want to leave from the same direction. Oh, they shut that gate off because the road turned black, this, that, and the other. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, they're expecting me back. How am I supposed to get back? I don't know where I'm going. So I'm speaking broken Arabic to my Iraqis. We're going back and forth, trying to figure it out. They convinced me that they know where they're going. Of course, we get in the vehicles and start driving. And of course, they're screaming at each other in the front seat, back and forth in Arabic, this, that, and the other. And I'm just trying to play it cool, talking, hey, you enjoying Iraq so far? How's it going? Trying to, chat them up and everything else. Eventually, after like 15 minutes of driving in circles, I figure out where we are. I can orient myself. I'm like, okay, I recognize this, this, and this. And, I start tapping them on the shoulder, telling them which way to go. We get back on the road. We get back down around Tampa somehow. Next thing you know, go over an underpass, come right past it. Boom, IED blows up. There's 3 guys on the side of the road with RPGs sitting on their shoulders, waiting to unload as soon as the vehicle stops. Thankfully, the guys that I trained, the Iraqi soldiers behind me, wasted all 3 of them.
Nice.
Put the vehicle back all the way through. And I didn't even see the guys on the side of the road, to be honest with you. I only found out they were there after we got back. So I was that close to being, an angel in heaven, so to speak. But that had happened like 4 days before I had left. So,
Man, that's crazy.
yeah. And then you guys, you said April 17th, and that was 5 days after I left, was sort of your alive day. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So you covered this. I just wanted to hit a little bit of context for the listeners. You hit it already on the head as far as how violent things had turned. We got there in January of 2006. You mentioned the Samara mosque bombing. That was February 22nd of 2006. And that basically ignited the civil war that happened in Iraq. I mean, they didn't call it that, but it basically ignited a civil war. And it was, Baghdad. I think that year, Mark, was the most deadly year for Iraqi civilians in the entire Iraqi war. I think it was the third deadliest for U.S. soldiers. But just to kind of give the listeners out there a little context, like it was already deadly violent, but it was magnified by times 100. So I found myself, we'd been there for a few months and we saw it just kept escalating. And we were, we weren't at a large forward operating base. We were actually at it was a compound with several houses that we were adjacent to with the 101st and their Iraqi army counterparts. But April 17th, this might sound weird to the listeners, but it was an administrative day for us. Even though we were in combat, it was an administrative day because you got shit to do. You got to do meetings, and for us, we were going to leave Apache, which is in Adamiyah, which is a suburb of Baghdad. It's up on the northeast side, like right on the Tigris. It was the last Sunni stronghold in all of Baghdad. Because the Shia had moved in and kicked everyone else out, but Adamiyah was the last Sunni stronghold, and all hell was breaking loose in Adamiyah. But we had an administrative day. We were dropping someone off in the green zone for a meeting, and then we were going to hit Route Irish and go to the Baghdad International Airport and get turret upgrades. We had like those standard turrets, and they were going to put the big thick glass. And then our interpreter was going to take some time off and fly back to the States. So that was our mindset on April 17th. And we dropped our guy off in the green zone. So here we are. We're 2 gun trucks, 6 special forces, and an interpreter, almost ready to leave the green zone to jump on Route Irish. And my embassy issued cell phone rings. And it's Chris, my special forces team leader. And he relayed an urgent and immediate request from the 101st and said, "Hey guys, all hell is breaking loose. They need some help." And we had an agreement with the 101st. Hey, if you guys need us, we'll come, but don't call us for something stupid. If you call us, we're going to burn shit down. So if it's that, call us, we'll come. And then if, we had the same deal with them, like, hey.
By the way, what was Chris's last name?
Chris Denham. He was like 6'6".
Okay, there was a Chris McIntosh that I worked with on a routine.
No. Chris was a West Point, like rocket nuclear science guy. Like he's brilliant, but he's like 6'6". So
couldn't miss him.
But we had an agreement with the 101st. If they needed us,
right,
they'd come. If we needed them, they would come to us, day, night, whatever. So he calls me on the radio and says, "Hey man, they need you." They had been engaged for 5 hours in Adamiyah, and we stopped the gun trucks and I pulled the guys around. It was one of those life and death type decisions where I felt as a leader that I didn't have to do it. I felt like I knew the answer, Mark. I knew what they were going to say, but I wanted to get a little buy-in from the guys. So I was like, "Hey, this is what's going on. Are you guys down?" They were like, "Hell yes, we're down. Let's do this thing." So we got in our gun trucks and we went back to Adamiyah. We tried to link up with the 101st guys. The first place that we went to was a little traffic circle called Antar Square. And we linked up with our Iraqi army counterparts. They were scared to death, fear all over their face, under fire. They had RPGs, PKM machine guns, AKs. This was a different level of Adamiyah fighter than what we were used to, Mark. We were used to kind of like the the guys that did a lot of harassment fire and they'd run away or melt back into the population. But the guys on April 17th were actually maneuvering on, U.S. forces and Iraqi army soldiers. So it was a whole different level of fighter. We believe, some Al-Qaeda folks had moved into Adamiyah because it was their last, strong point. And Sadr City guys kept going in there and kidnapping dudes. The whole sectarian thing was going on. So we felt like they had reinforcements for this day. Like these were no shit, these guys were fighting. But we linked up and started getting, some atmospherics, what was going on. We wanted to identify, the players, who was where, because, obviously we didn't want to shoot up our own people, but talk to the Iraqi army guys, try to give them a little bit of confidence and inspiration that we weren't going to leave them. And they were actually, man, they were fired up to see us because we had helped the 101st, before at night. So they kind of saw shadows, but to see us in the daylight because, our vehicles looked different. We had steel I-beams on our bumpers, our guys had beards, like we just looked different. So that fired them up. We linked up with the 101st. And it was like, hey man, like, tell me where all the bad guys are. And it was like, hey, basically the way you're looking, that's all bad guys. It was like, awesome. So our team, we were small. We didn't have Iraqi army soldiers that we had to deal with. We were unilateral, even though we were a small package. We carried a big punch. We had a 240 machine gun and a 50 cal. So, 2 vehicles, 2 gun trucks, 6 Green Berets, and an interpreter. And once I found out where everyone was at, I basically gave my gunners a left and right. And I was like, hey, see that to your left, see that to your right, anything in there, kill it. Obviously if it's a threat, but there was no friendlies there. So we started actually maneuvering on these side streets. And I gave the 101st time to kind of reorganize and figure out what was going on because they were basically stationary, just eating RPGs and machine gun fire. Gave them time to kind of figure out what was going on. And we just started maneuvering up this north-south road, kind of doing leapfrog, man, like a lethal version of leapfrog, working those side streets. Probably the first or second side street we hit. We had some guys at close range. They had kind of like, hey, it was like the welcome party, I guess, but 4 or 5 guys in a vehicle and they got out, RPGs and all that. And our 50 cal gunner ate them up at close range. And we had a guy that was probably 110 pounds, special forces guy, country boy from Texas, red hair, probably weighed 110 pounds, but he was surgical on a 50 cal and he just ate these dudes up. And I feel like that really kind of shifted the momentum for the entire fight because, they'd been there for fighting back and forth and messing around for 5 hours. And I mean, our first few minutes, man, we'd engaged and killed a bunch of dudes. So we just kept doing that. And then we linked back up with the 101st and the Iraqi army. And then we started pushing into the city of Adamiyah. And this is where it kind of goes into my action. There were several times, Al-Qaeda, not stupid by any means. They had set up obstacles and key intersections and roadways to slow down our maneuverability and to increase the danger to us and our vehicles.
Yep.
Because, if they could get us stopped there, then they got perfect, targets of opportunity. So I realized like, man, if we stop here, we're going to get eaten up. And we kind of stopped short. So the vehicles weren't at risk, but that meant I needed to jump out of the vehicle, exposed and under fire and move the obstacles so we could continue pushing and just continue inflicting a lot of damage on the enemy, which we did. But these obstacles was wires, barrels, tires, trash, you name it. They try to put it in the road to slow us down. So I moved that shit out of the way and then we could keep maneuvering, keep moving. And I had to do that several times while engaging the enemy at close range for some of those engagements. So we just did that.
Let me ask you, was there a point where you thought that, after you repeat this exercise 2, maybe 3 times, like hey, this isn't beneficial to us at all. Like we can't I can't keep getting out and moving tires and trash and everything else. Like, I mean, at some point in time, was there ever thought, hey, could I just blow right through this sort of barrier kind of deal? Or
No, it was enough to where it would have really messed up and got into the axles and the wheels and all of that stuff. I mean, they had them set up pretty good, and there were a few times where the interpreter, God bless him, got out and had to help as well. But we were trying to stay somewhat online, even though we were, kind of maneuvering in our own streets, pushing. It was actually pushing west toward the Tigris, and it just stayed with the flow to continue what we were doing, and we didn't have anything catastrophic, so we continued doing that. But we eventually did get to a point, though, Mark, where I received a phone call from the trail vehicle, and it was like, hey, D, you guys are leaking fluids so bad, like everywhere. And I was like, okay, roger that. And before I could even pass the message to my driver, he's like, man, I lost everything. Like, I got nothing. I got no power. So our engine block had been shot out.
Wow.
Which sucked because, we were kicking ass. So we had to tow ourselves out of there. We had our tow straps all set up and S-rolled and stuff like that. So our second vehicle was able to tow us out and able to call back to the rear, because we were only probably 10 minutes away from Apache at that point. And they got us another vehicle ready. We were starting to go black on ammo. We were starting to run out of ammo.
Right.
So we headed back, because this is probably like an hour and 15 minutes of just slugging it out in the streets, man. Just a straight slugfest. And we got back to Apache. We swapped out vehicles. We went back, did some more engagement, and we actually pushed the enemy all the way back to one of the largest Sunni mosques in Baghdad. It was Abu Hanifa.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of melted back into Abu Hanifa, dropped their arms, and they were done fighting for the day. They'd had enough. And
I wanted to ask you, when you talked about the momentum of battle, right? Because this is a thing. And I don't know if civilians know it, or maybe some people who've been in combat don't recognize it as a thing. But, the momentum of battle, you have it early, but then you start to run low on ammo. You're starting to run low on fuel. Vehicles are breaking down and everything else. Like, do you feel like you're losing momentum at any point?
I felt like we lost a little momentum right when our engine block got shot out. Like we had to deal with that, and it was like, man, damn it. I felt like we were definitely the hammer there for a bit. But I think by this point, the 101st and the Iraqi army had kind of got their feet underneath of them. So they were feeling pretty good about it. But that point where we got our engine block shot out, it turned out it didn't change any of the momentum, I think, because, the 101st and the Iraqi army were in a good place. But for us, yeah, definitely initially it was like, man, we lost some momentum. When we get back out, what's that going to look like? But once we did get that replacement vehicle and we did go back out, things were fine. We just linked back up, and actually we brought some ammo out for the 101st as well. And we kind of did like a little standoff there at Abu Hanifa at the mosque. Cause still that's a very sensitive, it's their mosque, and was going to, kind of wondering how that might play out, but thank goodness nothing happened. And, since no one was firing, we went back to Apache, and on the way back, we found out that there were some Iraqi police vehicles that had been abandoned, and I believe they had some casualties as well. But we ended up securing a couple trucks, I believe, some Iraqi police vehicles that had just been abandoned because they got scared and fled. So we took those vehicles back to base, to Apache, and then we had a sister team from Taji that was in the green zone at our company headquarters, and they brought our guy back that was there doing a meeting, and they said, hey, if you guys need some more bodies, we could go out there together. So we called over the 101st, and we actually heard that they're starting to move out now to me again. So we went out for a third time. We had a very, very minor skirmish, but at this point we were like really hoping, please let there be somebody that still wants to fight, because we got 4 gun trucks of SF dudes and we're ready to do some damage. But it was funny to see the look on the first group guys' faces, because they came from a very controlling environment at Taji, where their battle space owner was doing like 15-6s if guys fired their weapons, or if they smashed a car up, trying to get through traffic. So they came from a very controlling, like rigid environment. And then to see their faces, especially, and to hear what they said on the way back, or once we got back to Apache, like, holy shit, man, it looked like Fallujah out there. There's vehicles on fire, there's brass everywhere. It was really comical to kind of hear some of their stories. But that's April 17th, man. And I'm very humbled and proud and honored to receive the Bronze Star Medal with Valor for that action. But obviously that had nothing to do with trying to get a medal or trying to get recognition. That was all about, the love and the care that we had for our brothers from the 101st. We told them if they asked for help, we'd come help them, and we did. So that was an honor and a privilege. And we actually had, yes, I was exposed and under fire at times, but I had 2 gunners, the 240 machine gunner and the 50 cal. They were exposed the whole time, man. I mean, we didn't have those turret upgrades, so they were up there exposed, and they were both awarded a Bronze Star Medal with Valor as well. So that was a very very proud day for us and our whole entire team that we were able to contribute.
Look, it's amazing. I think it's kind of the thing that you when you train, you hope that it goes as effectively as you want it to. Obviously, the enemy always gets a say, and things are, never go to plan, so to speak. But when the parts of it that are executed well the way they're supposed to, it's almost like validation for everything that you do on a routine basis. It's why you put all the hours in, right? It's why you study so hard. It's why you train so hard. It's why you stay in such good shape for all those reasons, that when those moments come to fruition, you have, everything you need in front of you.
Mark, I actually have 5 key lessons learned from that day. If you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and share them. 5 key lessons learned from the 17 April 2006, and actually my rotation in Baghdad. The 5 key. Number 1, calm breeds calm. Panic breeds panic. Yeah. Number 2, control what you can control. Let go of the rest that you can't control. Control what you can, your emotions, your actions, your execution. Number 3, courage is contagious. Have the courage to get into the ring, because it makes it easier for others to follow you. And by that example, I'm talking specifically about the Iraqi army and the 101st, Number 4, embrace the chaos. We live in an uncertain world. Doesn't matter. You got to get after it anyway. And number 5, you can't fake preparation. You have to train. You have to prepare. You don't rise to the occasion. You rise to your level of training. And I think that's the big ones, man, from that. That's like my PhD lessons learned from that firefight. I mean, I just think it's, for most things, man, that's important. We just had a terrible mass shooting in Allen, Texas, and several people got killed. And that was one law enforcement officer that was able to respond to that and take down that gunner, or it would have been 10 million times worse. And I think about those lessons, like that law enforcement guy, absolute hero. I think he dealt with those same 5 things, man. I mean, he didn't have 20 officers there ready to go. Like it was him. That was it. So I just think, man, those things are so important. And I hope, maybe the listeners out there get something from it.
Well, and again, I would argue that all of those things that you had hinted on are more instinctive than anything else, right? I mean, instinctively, if you can remain calm,
Yeah.
this will be calm around you. If you instinctively get all flustered and verklempt and you know, but falling back on your training, can't fake in preparation. The instinct to do what you've trained to do kicks in when it's supposed to. The idea of controlling what you can control in a sense of, and again, I'm dissecting this here, but I say all this to say control what you can control. Look at what's in front of you, hit the targets in order, take what comes to you, try to see the next step ahead. I mean, all these things are things that happen in your mind necessarily more than there's a physical action that backs those things up. I only sort of look at it through that prism because, it makes sense that, when it comes to these lessons learned, a lot of leaders either have it or they don't. And some of that stuff is harder to train on than others, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, this happens on this deployment, and I guess you finally got the taste of combat, like true combat that you were looking for at this point in time. No more, hey, I didn't go on the mission, or no more, I was a little disappointed. You got your full and then some over there. And I think you had one more deployment to Baghdad after this one, correct?
Yeah. After that, like we came back, we redeployed in August of 06. So we had a lot going on that rotation, man. It was busy.
Yeah.
I think we were probably one of the most attacked special forces compounds in all of Iraq in 06, because it seemed like anything that went on in Baghdad, we got the blame for it. So we would get rocketed or mortared or whatever as punishment. But yeah, we went back again in 07 and we had the ISOF Recce mission. So we were doing a hell of a lot of targeting, and
that's the fun stuff.
That was a lot of fun, because at that point I really learned how strategically important it's like, man, we're kind of like the puppet master. We have an action arm, we have the ICTF guys and the ISOP.
They were good.
They were flipping really good, man. They were really good.
Denying how good they were. They were extremely well trained by us. I mean, I don't want to take all the credit, but you had a small contingent of Iraqi soldiers who wanted to be soldiers, who wanted to, the same thing that made America. They had that same feeling about their own country. They wanted to fight for it, and get rid of all the bad guys, and at least give Iraq a hope for something different. I mean, maybe we kind of forced that idea on them, but nonetheless, it all happened, and they were good. They were very good. There was nothing those guys couldn't accomplish. They didn't need much. Once they got ready to go, they didn't need much help from us. They were more capable on their own. And that ISOP brigade was supposed to be the tip of the spear of, Iraq doing it on their own, right? And they could have. They just needed backing and resources and money and time and, all the things that we didn't want to give them. Different conversation for a different day. For the rest of your career, you end up, I talked earlier about you went to SWIX, that's the Special Warfare Center and School at Fort Bragg. And you become an instructor there for the latter part of your career, right?
Yep. I did some instructor time, also did some staff time. And then I ended up retiring, and I retired in January of 2017. So I did a little over 26 and a half. Did some homesteading at Beret because I had some personal stuff going on, and became a single dad. So I really appreciate, the command and the Army working with me to allow me to kind of get through that and raise my kids and get them through school. So yeah, I did some homesteading there, but, try to do what I could on the instructor and the staff side, and then hung it up and then started my next journey, man.
Before we get to that, I just want to ask you real quick about the Major General Robert Frederick Award and the Larry Thorne Award. I wasn't familiar with any of them, I'll be honest with you, until I read about it. I'm not that tied into the inner workings of how those awards go and everything else, but can you just give me some background on it?
Yeah, so for the Larry Thorne Award, that's named after a very very
Decorated.
famous special forces soldier that was missing in action. I think they finally did recover his body in Vietnam and bring him back. But that award is given out annually to the best special forces operational detachment alpha in 10th group. And for the 06
Only for
rotation.
10th group.
Yeah, for all of 10th group.
Okay.
So, you know, 2nd, 3rd, 1st battalion. I think now they've grown by another battalion, but yeah, so it's very prestigious, and we were, you know, honored. And I think I have it. Yep, it's over this shoulder right here. That's the Larry Thorne. It's the picture of our team and all of that stuff. And then the Frederick Award is this one over here. That is an award that's, you know, given out once a year. I don't know if they still do it now. It could have changed, but it's given out through all of the active duty groups. So we have 5 special forces active duty groups, and we have 2 National Guard groups. So that's given out each year. It was to the top enlisted guy out of all those groups, and I was awarded that, man. Another absolute privilege for that.
Look at you. Look at you.
Yeah, man.
Continuing.
Fortunate. I had a great team, man. I had a great team, dude.
After you retire, you end up doing some work in DC, right? Director of Security and Director of Operations at the Museum of the Bible.
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. So actually, a guy that used to work for me back in the day for these rotations that we just talked about, 06, 07, he went on and he was part of a special mission unit in Fort Belvoir. And so he was in the DC area, and he ended up getting out. And he was hired to work at the Museum of the Bible as like the global director of security for all of like the overseas travel and, you know, trips to Israel and all that type of stuff. So, you know, I was looking for work, and, you know, I was getting ready to be unemployed, and he offered a position, and he offered an opportunity to interview. So I interviewed for that job. They were building the Museum of the Bible in 2016. They actually opened it in 2017, November 2017. But, you know, it's a $550 million museum, 430,000 square foot. I didn't know anything about museums other than being in like maybe 2 my whole entire life. And I really didn't like DC, but like I said, I needed work. So I took the job and said, hey, I might not know anything about museums, but I know a thing or two about keeping people safe and keeping people alive and protecting assets. So it actually was a perfect fit. And I think that is another lesson learned for guys maybe out there listening to the Hazard Ground right now that might be transitioning is, man, keep your options open. Don't get pigeonholed into something, you know, keep your eyes open and look for those opportunities. But yeah, I took advantage of it, man, and did the security role for a couple of years, rolled right into operations because it's such a natural fit, especially being a former team sergeant. That led to some consulting work, still work with a bunch of more museums when I was a consultant. And that actually got me located in Dallas. Well, actually, I'm north of Dallas, Texas, but in that role as a consultant, moved to Texas. And as a consultant, I had an opportunity to meet the current president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, Chris Cassidy, who has a unique background. I like to joke and say that he's the classic underachiever. He's a former Naval Academy grad, former Navy SEAL, MIT grad, and former chief NASA astronaut.
Dear Lord.
Yeah, right. He's such an underachiever. It's funny for me to say that. But so yeah, I got a chance to meet Chris Cassidy, and I think he was maybe a year into the job as the CEO. And, you know, obviously he was building, I can't say we at that point, but, you know, he was building the Medal of Honor Museum. They hadn't even broke ground or anything like that. So I had a chance to meet him. I was getting ready to give a presentation at the Texas Rangers for something else, but I just said, hey, Chris, man, I love what you guys are doing. I love this concept of this National Medal of Honor Museum. Like, I'm blown away that we don't have one, but I have some lessons learned from construction phase at the Museum of the Bible and from grand opening and day-to-day ops. I'd like to share them with you. I wasn't trying to pitch him. I wasn't trying to get a job. I was just like fired up about the mission. And I mean, these are my heroes. Like these are Medal of Honor recipients, our nation's highest, award for valor. And I mean, just my heroes that I grew up admiring. So I shared some lessons learned, and one thing led to another, and we kept having conversations. And he needed a good ops person, and he asked me. He said, "Hey, man, would you be interested in joining the team and doing some operations?" And I was like, "Hell, yes, I would love to join this team." So I started work February of 2022, chief of operations, and we ended up breaking ground for the museum March 25th for Medal of Honor Day of 2022. And here I am a year and a few months strong, making a lot of progress on the construction side. And man, it's such an honor and a privilege to have this position and to do the work. It definitely, it gives you a fire in the morning to come to work. So that's kind of how everything started, man, was that initial meeting with Chris Cassidy.
Now I have seen a Medal of Honor museum in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Is there any connection?
No, there's no connection. That's more of a local, it's not a national.
Got it.
I need to go to that museum. I haven't been to that one. I've heard a bunch about it.
I haven't been inside because it was closed when I was there, but I remember walking past it and going, So I was not aware. And then when I saw your guys' organization, like me, the Winterfall, this is all connected. And look, there are thousands of veterans charities designed for a variety of different things. So,
oh yeah,
there's nothing proprietary about the veteran space. I've said that for years. So there could be a Medal of Honor museum, and that's quite okay. Even if I don't understand it, I still think it's okay.
Yeah.
That said, what's kind of the goal for the National Medal of Honor Museum Foundation? Is it just to build a facility, or what goes on beyond that?
Well, we're still fundraising, so we still need several $1 million. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a second, what folks out there might be able to do, but we're trying right now. We're in the process of building the museum, which will have a leadership institute component as part of the museum, which will be able to do training and classes and courses for Fortune 500 CEOs, all the way to adults, all the way down to kids. So we'll have the museum, we'll have an institute, a leadership institute, and then we're also going to have a monument in DC that we're still trying to work through, a Medal of Honor monument. So that's probably like maybe a 2026 project, but that's kind of like the focus, and is really to try to raise the national consciousness of the Medal of Honor. And
the cynic in me chuckles, like getting a Medal of Honor isn't enough. Now you need a monument on top of it. Ooh.
Well, there's plenty. I just heard that they're putting the Global War on Terror. That monument got approved.
Yes, it did. Yeah, I know the president of the board as a former guest.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know the president and the whole thing. And
he's a former what?
He's a former guest here on the show. Also a former Green Beret, Michael Rodriguez.
Oh yeah. I knew he was he a 7th group guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I'll have to go back and find that episode, man. I'm connected with him, but I don't know him. I would love to get a chance to meet him and talk to him.
He is one heck of a hermano, as he likes to say. Mi hermano. He's definitely Latin. I forget which denomination. Anyway, regardless. But yeah, he's done incredible work. I can't wait to go for the dedication. He's invited me to go, and I'm looking.
Oh, dude, that's awesome.
When it's all done, they've listen. They had to go through lengthy things in Congress to even get it approved, because somewhere on the books it's written you can't have a memorial until after 10 years that combat has officially ended. So theoretically, combat ended in Iraq in 2021. I mean, in Afghanistan, the war on terror officially, quote, ended. We know that's not the case, but that said, we would have been waiting till my grandkids were old enough to see this thing if they because we're still in Syria and we're still fighting terrorists. I mean, it's never going to end. So
do you know, Mark, how they're doing on the fundraising side? Are they raising money and doing pretty good here?
I mean, they have, I think, last I checked, because I stay pretty tight to this, they have everything they need to get it erected. I think they're in the artist selection phase for the memorial itself.
Oh, that's great. I know that's a tedious process.
They got the site approved. They got the okay to build it. Now it's just, getting it approved in site design and everything else. And, I'm hopeful, sooner rather than later, they get this thing up and running. It's going to be an emotional time for a lot of us when we get there.
Yeah, for sure.
At least. It will be a very, very, I think about it and I get emotional just thinking about it. I mean, it's, it'll be a lot. It'll be a lot of overwhelming emotions for all of us. Like any of us who go, whenever you get a chance to go, it's, well, I wasn't around for the erection of the Vietnam Memorial, but I imagine for all those men who stood there at that wall when it was erected, or still go to that wall today and deal with the range of emotions that they deal with, we'll all sort of run through a similar gamut. I would guess.
So apologies for asking this if this is too personal, but I was just curious if you're anything like me. As I've gotten older and I'm probably a little bit more risk averse, and I have these feelings that I deal with, I'm probably a lot more, I don't know if sentimental is the right word, but I'm definitely a lot more emotional hearing the national anthem, or, I noticed that you wear a bracelet, Mark.
Yeah.
I wear a bracelet as well, and Memorial Day is coming. And I was just wondering if you have those kind of feelings that I have. Like, I feel like I'm a little bit more emotional, definitely tear up on things.
It hits different.
Yeah.
For me, I think there's a lot of emotion at play personally at this point. My actual career in uniform is coming to an end. I think that plays into it, but I think in general, I'm more emotional about it because, when you look back at how much you invested into it and, how much you laid it all on the line, and how much it those moments you can never get back. And the people who you did it with we've all moved on to different phases of our life. And it's this sort of disconnection to all of it. I feel like if there's an opportunity for me to go to the dedication with people that I served with, guys that I fought with, guys from 5th Group and 10th Group who I know, who I sat down, in the chow hall with and shared stories with, or we sat up late at night and had a beer, even though we weren't supposed to be drinking. Sat up late at night and had a beer. Wink, wink. With a cigar outside and just waxed about life when it was quiet for a few moments and we weren't on mission. If I was with those guys and I'd walk there, I'd probably be less emotional. Thinking about all those people that I was there with, thinking about all those moments where I could have, should have, would have maybe died, or thinking about the Iraqis that I trained side by side, wondering where they are. Like, those are all things that I can't ever hold on to again. And I think that's part of the emotion of the whole thing. And understanding where it is. I'm certainly a lot more sentimental. And I've got a lot more on the line now than I did back then. I was a single guy, I had nothing to worry about. I think about my children and their future and what we all fought for. Is it really, any better?
Yeah.
Where things are. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't 100% have the answer to it. I would argue, I agree. I'm probably a lot more sentimental about it now. I tear up a lot quicker now, but maybe part of that too is, and I've shared this here, you open that Pandora's box of PTSD and all the shit that you went through and everything else. And, you realize how effed up you got. Put all that back together. I think there's another emotional component there that's, needs to be dissected across the whole thing, if that makes sense. But, yeah, I am definitely more emotional.
Well, definitely. I will say this, Mark, man. It looks like you've taken great care of yourself, man, because it looks like you could probably do another 15 or 20 easy. No problem, dude.
Yeah, try. Thank you. But the game I play every morning when I get out of bed and I stand up is find out what hurts the most. You know, what's going to hurt today? Is it my back? Is it my, I mean, I've had 4 surgeries in the last 3 years. Is it my back? Is it my knees? Is it my shoulders? Is it just my head? Do I just want to go back to sleep? You know, no, I keep myself in good shape, but that's because I'm vain. It's all it is.
Yeah, man. But I'm with you. I'm right there with you.
Listen, I mean, when you try to encapsulate the amount of literal blood, sweat, and tears you put into your career, and you look back on it, it feels like it's gone in an instant. You know, it's all a blink of an eye. Like, again, I just crossed 24 years. I just look around and go, where the fuck did time go?
Yeah, and I know you're gonna be able to sympathize with me from being an officer, a former officer, and how the timelines work and stuff like that. But you know, I had this greatest of times as a special forces guy on an operational detachment alpha. You know, it was great. And then all of a sudden you become a team sergeant. And then the clock starts ticking, just like it does, you know, like if you're a company commander or, you know, battalion commander or whatever. Like when I hit team sergeant, and then it was like, man, my clock is ticking. And I would try to tell my guys all the time, it's like, man, every day's a privilege. Because, you know, you don't really see it as a younger guy on a team, but once you get to that team sergeant or the team leader position, it's like, man, every day is ticking and every day is a privilege, because before you know it, someone else is going to be in that position doing that job. And it's just the big army has to keep rolling on. So yeah, man.
I mean, look, think about your alive day and the day that I got off. I always think about the day I got off the plane coming back from Iraq in that first one. It's 17 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. We talk about it. It brings up the emotions. Like it's almost like you want to go back there and do it again to a certain extent. But, you know, we're almost talking 2 decades ago. Where the hell did it all go? So,
yeah, it goes fast, man. It goes fast.
And look, I think what you're doing, any chance when it comes to the museum, any chance you get to honor, memorialize, remember, and retell the story of the war on terror and what we had to go through, I always think there's a benefit. You know, we've been fortunate enough on this show to interview some survivors of Pearl Harbor and a couple of World War II vets, right? That generation, that greatest generation is down to dozens of people left, if less than that, you know, and who's there to tell those stories anymore about World War II? We understand it. We get it because we've lived through combat and why that's important. But is the average millennial even giving a rip about World War II anymore? No. And they shouldn't. I'm not saying they should. But, you know, there's going to come a time where our generation of those who fought in the war on terror is going to start to die off. And I'm glad there are museums like yours. There are shows like the Hazard Ground and everything that are here to hopefully keep these things going, you know, in perpetuity and chronicling, you know, this combat, this war, this hell that we went through in ways that people can understand and consume for you know, forever.
Yeah. And I'm sure you probably look at this the same as I do. Like, it's critically important for us to kind of document this. And I think you're providing such a great service, because this generation, you know, they're listening to a lot more things. They're listening to clips that they run across on Instagram, or they're listening to videos on podcasts on YouTube and things like that. So I think it's important. And if just one person listens to this and they hear you talk about something, it's like, oh man, that was a great idea. Or if someone listens to the 5 lessons that I broke out from April 17th and it helps them at some point, maybe in a future conflict, or, you know, as a cop or whatever. But
yep.
Man, I think that's valuable. And I think that's a great service that you're providing. And we hope that we're going to have the same at the museum, where people can come and be inspired by these heroic tales of, you know, the Medal of Honor recipients. So yeah, man, I think it's a great service, and we need to do something to try to, you know, have some unity in our country right now. We're, really divided. So if we can do anything to bring people together, where it's listening to Mark Zeno on Hazard Ground, or, coming to the Medal of Honor Museum and getting a little inspiration. I mean, I think we should be trying to do it,
Yeah, no, again, I agree. And you guys can go to mohmuseum.org. That's MOH, Medal of Honor, mohmuseum.org. You could donate there if you'd like to help out. Go check out the website. There's a lot of great information there. Kind of gives you, it lists all the recipients there's a database of all the Medal of Honor recipients. And
go buy some Black Rifle coffee, Medal of Honor blend.
There you go.
See, I got some Black Rifle coffee.
I just had some this morning. Listen, you sent me some. I'm very grateful. It's
it
is
K-Cups just launched the Medal of Honor, the National Medal of Honor blend Black Rifle coffee. K-Cups just launched. We get 100% of those proceeds. They give 100% back. So, those guys are great. The leadership of Black Rifle, most of those guys are all former veterans. The CEO, Evan Hafer, his number 2 guy, Matt Best. I mean, all those guys, great Americans, great patriots. Mark, I hope that maybe at some point you can get those guys on the show. They'd probably love to talk to you.
Listen, I would welcome the opportunity. Just because now I'm an official coffee drinker of their products. So now they owe me. No, I kid. But again, website, we've had plenty of Medal of Honor recipients on this show. So there are, you could look at their names and hear their stories and then watch them tell it right here. So it's all right here for you to see. But again, mohmuseum.org, support as best you can. And we'll get to a point here eventually that the Hazard Ground will make a donation for you guys. So we'll
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Some funds your way, but I loved hearing your story. I love what you're doing now. You're involved in so many things in the veteran space beyond the Medal of Honor Museum. It's guys like you that are where the rubber meets the road for a lot of us who are continuing to stay in the fight and keep on living. Obviously, we veterans have their own set of challenges and still everything that we're still dealing with, and we still got to make sure that we're side by side and all this stuff and take care of each other. Nobody takes care of us better than we do. And that's sort of the charge that we have going forward. So, best of luck, continued success. I know you and I will stay in touch. I want you to stay in touch because it's been great to get to know you a little more and hear your story. And I know it'll resonate a lot with the audience, but continued success and best of luck with the museum.
Yeah, and if anybody in the audience wants to connect, I'm on all the different social media platforms. There's not very many Darrell Utts on LinkedIn, so if you want to start there, but I'm happy to connect and hopefully, send out some information about the foundation. And it's been a privilege to be here, Mark, and I'm looking forward to working with you going forward.
No, absolutely. Let's continue to stay in touch. Again, great things going forward. mohmuseum.org is where to go. Medal of Honor Museum, and you keep on keeping on, Darrell. It's been great, and we certainly appreciate you. And as we always say, Darrell Utt, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thanks, brother.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.